So what we're going to do, first of all, is, well, I'm going to say hello. I'm Sarah Robbins, and I'm the chair of Birmingham Humanists. Um, Lovely to see you all. You're very welcome. And this is the very first session ever of the West Midlands Humanist Month. Um, One of the main purposes for these sessions is for us all to have a chance to connect with humanists from across other groups in the West Midlands. I know we've got people from outside the West Midlands as well, who are also very welcome. We're going to start today's session by putting you into small groups so that you can actually have a chat and make some connections. So in a couple of minutes, you're going to be placed into a breakout room. So what will happen is a little dialogue box will come up on your screen inviting you into a breakout room. So you need to click on that and you'll be taken into another room. After 10 minutes, you'll then get a countdown within your room, which will then bring you back into the main room. Okay? And then we'll come all back together and tell you a little bit more about West Midlands Humanist Month, and we'll be joined by our guest speaker, Andrew Copson. So when you're in your breakout rooms, we'd like you to introduce yourself to the other people in the room, find out where each other are from. If you're involved in a local group, then please share some information about your group, about the kind of activities that you get up to in normal times, but also what you've been doing in COVID times. And it's an opportunity to get to know each other, to learn from each other, and generate some new ideas for local groups, and look at how we can continue to build this relationship between the West Midlands groups. So lockdown, for all its difficulties it's created, has created some real good opportunities actually, and a lot of us are visiting each other's groups and getting to know people and having new opportunities that way, which is lovely. If you're not a member of a local group, then just take the opportunity in your small group to find out more about the groups that are in your area and make some connections. See if you're then interested in getting more involved in your local group. So if that's okay, Simon is in charge of the grouping people. Right, hello, welcome back everybody. I hope that was a good opportunity to meet some new people. So before we introduce our guest speaker, Andrew, I just want to tell you a little bit more about why we are here. So about a year ago, Birmingham Humanists put a call out to all the other local groups to talk about having a West Midlands conference, which was going to be very exciting. It was going to be in real life. There was going to be lunch and everything. But then world events overtook us. So here we are online. And we've decided, rather than having a full day conference, that we would break it up into a series of evening meetings. So every Tuesday in February, we will be meeting as the West Midlands groups. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for the other meetings. I'll tell you a little bit more about those later. But the overall theme of the sessions is around humanism in action. So we're going to be talking about some of the current issues facing humanists locally and nationally, hearing about how West Midlands humanists are active in their communities, and hoping to inspire some of you to become more active yourselves, if you're not already. So I moved to the West Midlands 30 years ago this year to go to the University of Birmingham, which is, can't quite believe it's 30 years, but it is, all the way from the East Midlands. So I grew up in Nottingham. But I came here and I decided to make Birmingham my home, and it's a fascinating place to live. It's not always an easy place to live, and it's a very interesting place to be a humanist. And the West Midlands covers a really diverse area of the country. We've got big cities nestled in rolling countryside, and the different groups are based in very different areas, which I think is really interesting. The big cities are some of the most ethnically diverse areas in the country, and Birmingham and Sandwell in particular are two of the most religious areas in the country. So that's quite an interesting perspective on things, and gives interesting opportunities. If you're interested in dialogue, it's a very interesting place to be, but it can be challenging. Of course, we are the home of Trojan Horse and of parents protesting outside schools about LGBT inclusive education. But actually, if I walk a mile from my house, I end up in Worcestershire. So it's a lovely place to be. We've got people today, I think, from all of the areas of the West Midlands. We've got Shropshire, Worcestershire, Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Birmingham, Sandwell, Walsall, Wolverhampton, Coventry and Solihull. Sorry if I missed you out. And we've got some people from exotic places like London and Cornwall. So wherever you are, you're very welcome, and we hope you will enjoy the evening. So we are delighted to be joined by Andrew Copson, who's the Chief Executive of Humanist UK, also from the West Midlands, or I think on the border, isn't it, Andrew, of West and East Midlands, but for tonight we're claiming him as a West Midlands boy. And he's going to talk to us just in a minute about some of the current issues facing humanists and humanism. So this is how it's going to work. Andrew's going to talk for about 20 minutes. We're going to keep everybody on mute while he's talking. When Andrew has finished, we're going to put you back into breakout rooms. You're going to have about 5 minutes to chat with your people in your room about a bit of a reflection on what Andrew has spoken about. And then we want each group to think of a burning question for Andrew. So you probably have lots of questions, but if you can all try and come up with one key question for Andrew. When we come back into the room, into the main room, we want one person from each group to type your question into the chat. So when you're in your breakout room, you need to nominate somebody who's going to be your scribe when we're back in the main room for them to type your group's question into the chat. And then I will be putting your questions to Andrew from what is showing up in the chat. I hope that makes sense. So we will definitely wrap up the session at 9 o'clock. So hopefully we'll have a chance to get through all of the questions. If not, we will figure out a way to deal with that. I don't know what it is yet. So is that all clear? Are we happy with that? Andrew, you're good to go? So for those new to Zoom, again, I would say if you, on the top right-hand corner, if you're on a laptop, there's an option for view. When we're all together, it's nice if we're on gallery view, but actually when Andrew's speaking, I would recommend you go on speaker view, and then you can just focus on him. He will be a bigger picture on your screen. Okay. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can you hear me okay? Nod if you can. Yes, excellent. Okay, good. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you especially to those who have come from places as distant as Cornwall and London and Hampshire and so on. I was apprehensive because I was here this evening under false pretenses. I am in fact 1 mile from the West Midlands, East Midlands border on the wrong side for this evening's event here in Leicestershire. But I am, you're right, born and bred in the West Midlands, just across there in Nuneaton, near Coventry. So I feel like I'm entitled to be here. I'm going to speak a little bit about the current work of Humanists UK and the barriers and opportunities that we face in the doing of that work, and then I'm going to come back in a few weeks' time and think more about the future. So today, after you've had all your other sessions as part of this extended conference, but today is part of where we are now and a little bit, I suppose, of how we got here. So this year we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of Humanists UK. We're putting it like that because it was 125 years ago this April in 1896 that the Union of Ethical Societies first was established, which is the organisation that changed its name to British Humanist Association in the mid-20th century and now is Humanists UK. And across that time, and there are many people I can see on this call who've had long and distinguished involvement with the British Humanist Association, as was, and Humanists UK as is. So this is no news to you. But over that time, of course, our work has changed, but it's always been diverse, occurring across a range of different activities, from community services to education to advocacy. And it's always been responsive. So it's changed in response to the needs of society, the challenges that our particular worldview face, the challenges that non-religious people and people with humanist beliefs face. And as a result, it's always changing. Today, our work occurs around 4 main areas, and that's what I'm going to use to structure what I say. So the first thing that Humanists UK does is it wants to communicate to as many people as possible what humanism is. So maintain a public awareness program and an educational program to increase and deepen understanding of the humanist approach to life, particularly amongst non-religious people for whom we think it's obviously particularly relevant. And in doing that, we want more people who have humanist beliefs and values and a humanist approach to life to be able to identify themselves as humanists. And we want to do that because we think that there is a certain effect that thinking about your beliefs and your values and recognizing yourself as having describable beliefs and values can do for you, for your personal development, for your mental fortitude, for the way that you can face life and understand what's happening to you and relate to others and have a sense of social responsibility. So for all those reasons, we try to raise awareness of humanism. And we do it in lots of different ways. I'm just going to click through a few of them. So we obviously have a big school speakers program. Last year, in the course of the year, our school speakers spoke in front of about 50,000 pupils in England and additional pupils in Wales and Northern Ireland. In the last year, obviously, since the pandemic, it's been more difficult to do live school speaking, but we're doing more virtual speaking. We have resources for teachers to assist in their delivery of mostly RE lessons about humanism. Last year, we had 80,000 downloads of our education resources from our Understanding Humanism website, which was a record for us. And we put out content online, of course, digital content on Facebook, on Twitter, videos about humanism, quotes from famous humanists, quizzes, are you a humanist, how humanist your beliefs, podcasts and so on and so forth. And in the last year, we got about 67 million impressions of our content across all of our platforms. So that's the first thing that we do. We try and communicate humanism to people, especially to non-religious people. The barriers that we face in this, the issues that we face, which is the title of this session that I've been asked to speak to, the issues that we face in that are largely ones to do with, in schools, to start with, largely ones to do with curriculum crowding, curriculum content. Obviously, humanism has to be taught in religious education. There's a growing desire to force as many different religions and beliefs as possible into the curriculum. So we have a crowded curriculum we have to deal with. We also have to deal with indifference from some schools and some often governments in Department for Education when they're rewriting curriculums about humanist approach to life, thinking instead that young people should learn about religions, especially when conservatives are in government. We face the arguments that there's something insubstantial about the humanist view, something second best or unworthy of study. In relating to the public rather than just in schools about humanism, we have to cope again with a sort of crowding, not curriculum crowding because of excessive content, but just the crowding of everyday life, the messages that are constantly buzzing at everybody, and we have to try and find ways to cut through all that noise and be able to reach the people that we think might be interested in what we've got to say. They're two of the issues that you might want to think about. Think about the issues that we face in formal education, getting an airing for humanism, and the issues that we face with non-religious people in society, making contact with them through different media to tell them about humanism. The second area of work we have, so having done awareness of humanism, is we provide community services to help non-religious people live happier, more confident and more ethical lives. And we do this across a number of different programs. So we have our celebrant program where we train celebrants to perform funerals, weddings and other ceremonies. We have our pastoral care program where we train and accredit humanist pastoral carers to take up volunteer and paid positions, normally in chaplaincy teams in hospitals, prisons, and other contexts like hospices and care homes. We have a scheme for apostates called Faith to Faithless, which aims to support people who are leaving very high control religions with peer support and with peer communities online and in real life, and with mentoring opportunities. And in those three areas, again, in recent years, we've seen very good numbers. 36% of acute trusts now in England have one of our accredited pastoral carers on their chaplaincy team. 15% of prisons have either a volunteer or a paid humanist member. The National Panel for Religions and Beliefs in Prisons now has a humanist member. The NHS guidelines for chaplaincy that are shortly going to come out are going to go further in advising non-religious pastoral care for patients. Our ceremonies, of course, have continued to grow in popularity. In Northern Ireland, we're the fastest growing type of wedding. In England and Wales, our weddings are the fastest growing type of wedding, including of legal marriages. And our contribution to ceremonies over the years, many of the people who, or at least one or two of the people who pioneered our contribution to ceremonies are in on this call, and so they know that only too well, has been avant-garde and has led to incredible social change in the wider area of ceremony. In these situations, again, we face very specific issues. So in pastoral care, we face both institutional resistance on the part of the established church, which dominates around, well, over 80% of the paid and volunteer pastoral care positions in our national institutions, prisons, hospitals, even more in the armed forces, dominates and is a fierce defender of its position in those places. They do that obviously to preserve their own influence, but they also do it because they haven't yet been persuaded that non-religious people even have distinctive needs. There's a general idea amongst the Church of England that Jews can have a rabbi, Muslims can have an imam, the non-religious can have a Church of England priest. They can be taken care of in the same way as Christians. And that's a big structural issue that we face in the provision of our pastoral care. We also face in the provision of our pastoral care an issue to do with time. We haven't been involved in this work for nearly as long as the religious organisations that are involved in it. They've built up structures, they've built up whole universities in some cases to train their own providers of this sort of pastoral care. We face issues in ceremonies, interestingly, problems of success. You know, we've had many emulators of the model of a humanist funeral, especially over the last couple of decades, people seeing the success of personalized, tailored, non-religious funerals and thinking that they could probably do that, albeit outside of a humanist setting, and setting themselves up as celebrants in different ways. Whether that's a problem or not, I don't know. It's obviously a provision of non-religious ceremonies, which could be, some people would see, I know some of our members would see that as a success in the wider sense that those sorts of rites of passage have been given a non-religious tinge. Others of us would say that the provision of humanist ceremonies per se is desirable because there's some substance to the ceremonies then, and the rising awareness of humanism goes with it. And of course, in our apostate work, these are just 3 of our community service programs, but the third one I mentioned before is the apostate work. So I'll mention some of the barriers that we face in the provision of that work. In our apostate work, we face, of course, the problem that the issue itself is insufficiently understood. It isn't even yet an issue in most people's minds in this country. So whereas the persecution perhaps of people with different characteristics like sexual orientation or women or Jews, anti-Semitism is obviously seen as a big problem in our society in some sectors. Although all those things sort of exist almost as concepts people are familiar with, the idea that apostates, people who leave a religion and become non-religious in this country, might face active persecution is still not fully realised. So again, there's a barrier of understanding. There's some of the questions you might want to think about when thinking about the barriers to do with our community services. So the promotion of humanism per se, awareness of humanism, promotion of our community services. The third aim that we have, of course, is to do with advocacy, to do with changing society, and changing society specifically by reforming law and policy, where it has currently a negative effect on individual freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, and freedom of choice. Generally, Humanists UK has a policy platform of wanting more people to enjoy greater freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of choice over their own lives. And that is, of course, freedom of choice to the extent that's compatible with the rights and freedoms of others. That's a classic, liberal humanist formulation of this idea. We do that by trying to influence public opinion through the media on the issues that we adopt, by trying to influence legislation, by lobbying government. We have termly meetings with civil servants in the 3 or 4 government departments where we're particularly interested: Department for Education, Department for Housing, Communities, Local Government, Foreign Office, and the DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport. We also do that by working with politicians directly. There's a parliamentary humanist group that has 120 MPs and peers in membership of it, who we work on specific legislation. And we do that through trying to influence case law in court. So by taking legal cases, usually by suing the government, in order to try and correct some problem that we've seen that is a barrier to freedom of expression, freedom of thought, equal treatment of people regardless of religion or belief, or freedom of choice. We have about 28 different policy areas, although we don't have active campaigns on them, all of those areas at any one time. And so it's almost impossible to talk through all the different issues that we face in each of those campaigns. But they're rather similar actually to the issues that I've highlighted that we face both in our promotion of humanism work and in our provision of community services. There is indifference in many cases, especially with the government of the current flavour that we have in England and in the UK. A general inclination to see things as not requiring reform or not requiring change, a preference for a sort of institutionalized and cultural religion to continue to influence law and policy within our education system, within our legislature and elsewhere in public policy, rather than have any sort of secularization or any sort of equality, especially equality of treatment as between people based on religion or belief. That's the current government, of course, obviously. A general problem that's present both now and whatever type of government is in power is that many of our issues, although people are very supportive of them in principle, have quite low salience to most people when compared with other things. So as an example, 3/4 of people will say they want to see an end to religious selection in state schools, but a very, very much smaller proportion than that will say that this is in their top 10 issues. The only issue that we have that ever rises to the top 10 of a significant number of people's personal issues is assisted dying for the terminally ill and incurably suffering. But even there's a terrible tragedy of overwhelming public support, but complete political intransigence because of catering to a very small but vocal lobby of people who are against it. And that's the third issue that we face in our political work, in our advocacy work. So political indifference, low saliency of our issues, even where there's high support. And thirdly, very powerful and active and muscular and vocal lobbyists against our view. Church of England is obviously the 8th largest NGO in the world, incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy, woven into the establishment of our country in Westminster. We have greater success in Wales and Northern Ireland than we do in England, and it's mostly down to the established church. But other lobby groups that are much louder, much wealthier than us include the big anti-abortion, big anti-assisted dying ones too. So that's the three, I think, main issues that we face in our advocacy work. And the fourth aim we have is, if those are our three sort of external facing aims, more people knowing what humanism is, more non-religious people being happier, confident, fulfilled, more people in general having greater freedom in their lives. Our fourth aim is really an internal one. We want Humanist UK itself to be a network of people, an organisation of people, a movement of people who can communicate with each other, can be active, will be able to be out there as proponents of humanism, as local activists, as celebrants, as pastoral carers, as school speakers, as leaders and activists within their own community, as campaigners, in every aspect of their life, people who have opportunities to participate in and to grow our own movement and reputation. And that really is one where we face very significant barriers, the same that other organizations face as well, is how do you get that perfect balance between policy expertise, and which we have at the centre of Humanist UK, policy expertise, service provision against rigorous standards to make sure that everyone gets the services that they deserve, and the promotion of humanism at that online and digital level, which is where we reach the tens of millions of people. How do you get all of that at the same time as you can do good local delivery of those things, that you can equip people to be able to be ambassadors for all of that in their own areas, and also organise their own groups, and in some cases branches of Humanist UK, to drive all of that forward as individual members of Humanists UK and supporters of all our work who can make those changes that we want to see, but in their own communities. And that is the final issue really that I want to raise. It's not unique to us. You go to any meeting of staff or activists in any national organisation, and the discussion of how you make it work locally, how you deliver on your aims locally in the national context, of course crowds the agenda at most meetings, but it is an issue. I thought that particularly given where we've all come from today, where you've all come from in local groups, you might wish to consider in your groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a great overview of the work of Humanists UK and the issues facing humanists currently. So Simon is going to do his magic thing to send you back into breakout rooms. It's random, I think, so you may meet some different people. So take a couple of minutes to say hello, introduce yourselves, do a little bit of networking, but then you've got 5 minutes to think of your burning question for Andrew and to nominate a scribe who will come back and write your question in the chat. Okay? Right, welcome back everybody. So hopefully you all nominated a scribe who are now going to write questions in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to make a start with our very first question. It was from Jane Salt from Coventry, Warwickshire. Does Humanists UK ever join forces for its campaign, such as with NSS for assisted dying or the BMA? You're on mute, Andrew.
We do a lot of our work in coalitions. So, for example, we either forming and leading coalitions or just joining them ourselves. A good example would be our current one that we've put together, that we're leading on judicial review and Human Rights Act to try and defend the Human Rights Act provisions and the provisions of judicial review. There is only one place in the entirety of UK law where the right to freedom of religion or belief, which includes the right to non-religious beliefs, appears in our domestic law, and that's in the Human Rights Act. So it contains so many of the foundational provisions for a lot of our causes and campaigns. And so we've built a coalition of over 250 organisations for that, including the Quakers have joined us, Save the Children, the Big Issue Foundation, huge, not Greenpeace, huge numbers of groups. We're members of lots of other coalitions. We co-founded obviously the Accord Coalition for the Reform of Inclusive Schools that includes teachers' unions, religious groups, and we work with Dignity in Dying on the question of assisted dying. It's very important to work together with any groups that share your aims and your tactics. And there's some people are resistant to work together as groups, and I think that's a shame, but it is the right way to do it. There's this nice, I went to a seminar once in Boston by the American Civil Liberties Union. I was on my honeymoon actually, but I dipped out to go to this seminar because I'd heard about it. Not very impressed. It was professionally interesting, but it was personally perhaps not the right thing to have done. But and they have, of course, in America, a lot of different organizations in progressive organizations, all trying to achieve very similar changes, but in competition with each other for funding and members and so on. And they coined this nice concept in America called co-opetition, which is organizations that you've got to cooperate and collaborate with, whilst at the same time, as it were, competing for members and for attention. And I found that a lot of other UK organizations aren't very comfortable with that. They find it difficult to cooperate with organizations that they see as competitors, but Humanists UK certainly has as one of its main aims working in coalition wherever possible. I think that's in our internal manifesto, working in coalition wherever possible. So we do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through the questions myself here, Sarah?
You just read them out, yes.
Yeah, because they're right here. I can see them, and you can all see them too, so you'll know that I'm not avoiding a difficult one. So Kerry has, what's Humanists UK doing to increase awareness, involvement of Black and minority ethnic individuals in our work? Well, of course, it's an extremely important area of work for us. as it is for everybody, because, but especially for us, because we're obviously a movement that wants to project certain ideas and projects them, and so to reach as many people as interested in those ideas as possible. But one of those ideas, of course, is the idea of the universal nature of the human being, and that has to be an idea. The humanist approach to life, the humanist view of the human being, should be a view that transcends all differences of ethnicity, of nationality, all tribal differences, and all differences of colour. So we have that as an aim. The problem that we have, of course, is that we've got an inbuilt disadvantage in our pursuit of this aim, because the non-religious in this country, which is, as it were, the pool in which we can fish for members, for supporters, for celebrants, is overwhelmingly white. So the UK society, I think, is like 85% white. I think that's right. It might be a little bit less, or a little bit more than that. The non-religious are 95% white. So there is an astonishingly small pool of people who have minority ethnic identities. So we try and reach out to organisations like the Association of Black Humanists to help us increase our diversity. We have certain structural policies. So, for example, in our recruitment of celebrants, if people apply for celebrant training and they are a member of a group that we're particularly trying to target our diversity within, so for example, they might be in Lincolnshire, where we don't have many celebrants, or they might be Black, or they might have some Asian ethnicity, then they will be preferred. They'll be preferred for training. So they will go to the top of the list for training. Everyone gets trained eventually, but it's a matter of fast tracking people from underrepresented groups within ourselves. We try to do other things as well. So we've got a target to increase our number of patrons who are either Black or from other minority ethnic identities. We've done that recently with some success. One of the problems is that, again, it's a bit like women. Actually, successful women in public life quite often, it's the same often with Black and minority ethnic people, is that if you rise to prominence in your chosen field, you're instantly targeted by everyone, because everyone's in the same drive to diversity, and so everyone wants a bit of you all the time. And so, for example, there are various famous Black humanists in particular who, whilst being supportive and members, don't feel they have the time to commit to being patrons. So we do it across a number of different fronts, and we benchmark and measure our progress in staff, in volunteers, in trustees, in patrons, in celebrants, in school speakers, in pastoral carers, on both ethnic, sex and regional grounds. And we do that every year as an attempt to be more diverse. How is humanism best defined, asked James's group, and in addition, does it set itself apart from religion as other to it, or as a complement to religious values but without their beliefs? Interesting question. So Humanists UK, certainly for the last few decades, has very consciously and deliberately identified a humanist approach to life as being one that is non-religious, one that is based on a naturalistic view of the universe, one that puts human morality and the human search for meaning and creation of meaning at the centre of our calculations, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of values there, and many other books have been written about humanism. If you want a definition of humanism, I think you could read The Little Book of Humanism, quite a good book. It came out recently about this, or we've got web pages on the definition of humanism. But the second part of your question is more noteworthy, perhaps, because there are, of course, many people who say that they have all these humanist beliefs and values, but they also have a religious identity, and they want to be able to pursue these two things sort of simultaneously. And, you know, I think it's worth preserving the non-religious integrity of the concept of humanism and the humanist idea of life. But I think we have to recognize that in practice, people's identities, beliefs and values are very complex and complicated, and that no one sits in a sort of impermeable silo, uninfluenced by other ideas, and that we're all quite messy in our worldviews and composite. But Humanists UK has always worked with a definition of humanism that is it's a non-religious approach to life. Question from room 7. How do we get more younger people involved locally? I think this is a big difficulty. I mean, we do an analysis, regular analysis of in the same way I talked about ethnic identity analysis of all our different constituencies and groups, including members and celebrants and so on. We do that same sort of analysis, not every year, but almost every other year, against age. And we have more reliable data on age because when people join, they have to give their date of birth because according to company law in England and Wales, people can only join as a voting member if they're over 16. So we collect date of birth information, which means we have it on our members. And the membership and supporter base of Humanists UK skews young. So young people are disproportionately represented in the membership of Humanists UK. And that's not surprising because, of course, the non-religious are disproportionately young. So there's a slight skew towards the young in our membership. I think maybe 30% of our members are under 35. It's something like that. But it's obvious that isn't reflected locally in local humanist groups. And so local humanist groups, for as long as I've been at Humanists UK, which is I think 16 years this year, every local group I've ever been to has been asking itself the question of how they can encourage younger people to become involved. And this is not a distinctively humanist group problem. This is a problem that lots of local organisations face. I don't think there's any clear answer. Two things that I've noticed do work is that when instead of meeting socially, local groups have tried to take action to do, for example, a campaign about some local school or pursue some other advocacy aim related to Humanists UK's broader aims, that has attracted a more of a range of ages to it, in my experience, limited experience. And the second thing is just sort of try and vary the times and nature of the events that you might have, which does seem in some areas to work. The real shame is those local groups where you see a young person come every now and again. So over the course of a couple of years, you might have sort of like 25 young people who, if only they'd all come on the same day, might have been able to build a little bit of momentum there. We've got our section Young Humanists now for 18 to 35-year-olds. And I know that they started doing some thinking about how they could support branches, Humanists UK branches, to get more young people along. But I think that's a really interesting question that needs more research and investigation. Ben, hello Ben. Could Humanists UK produce an online training to be a humanist rep, like a school speaker, but trained to be a point of contact with good rounded knowledge for adults? I think that's a really good suggestion. It's one of the things that we're actively looking at the moment. So at the moment we have a range of accreditations for people. You can be accredited as a celebrant in one of our 3 ceremonies. You can be accredited as a pastoral carer to work in the scenarios I talked about at the beginning. You can be accredited as a school speaker or an education volunteer. You can be accredited as a Humanists UK dialogue rep, which shows that, and what all of these sort of accreditations show is that Humanists UK has, by applying, in the form of training materials, its experience and knowledge and judgment, has said, you can do these things to a high standard in a way where we could all be proud of you and know that you were doing that you were doing right by us reputationally and spreading a good awareness of humanism in an admirable way. And it is entirely possible that we'll be seeking to add new categories of sort of accreditation or training over the next couple of years. We used to have something called the BHA Local Development Volunteers. I don't know if anyone here was one of them. This was about, it could even be 6 or 7 years ago now. I was about to say it was just a couple of years ago. That I realised that when I say that these days, that's almost never true, and it was actually about a decade ago. But it was recently, it was within living memory, that we had a scheme called the Local Development Volunteers, who then became the BHA Local Representatives, who were trained to specifically interact with local authorities on questions to do with religion or belief equality and human rights. And that was very successful for as long as it lasted. And I think it could be some version of that could come back. So my answer to you, Ben, is yes, and I think that we'll try and move into that. And any suggestions, of course, will be very much appreciated. Adrian Davis, Covent, Warwickshire. How does the UK compare to other countries? Can we learn from their experiences, perhaps Scandinavian countries? Yeah, well, one of the privileges that I've had over the last few years is to be president of Humanists International, which is the global umbrella body for humanist groups and has 120 members in 65 countries. I have to get that the right way around. 120 members in 65 countries. And the range of humanist organizations is incredible. You know, you go from Pakistan, where it's unlawful, you know, it's a criminal offense to try and set up a humanist organization. People meet in secret in coffee shops. And, you know, humanists who come out as humanists on their Facebook are literally lynched by their classmates, as happened to one humanist in the university just 2 years ago. And then the other extreme, the Norwegian humanists, who are co-established together with the Norwegian Lutheran Church and receive, you know, millions of kroner. Yes, I think kroner. Millions of kroner every year to fund their activities. And 25% of people in Norway self-identify as humanist in surveys. It's 6% in the UK, so huge difference. And it's all very successful and different. And you know, obviously in the UK, we're more to one end of that spectrum than to the other, although in some ways we only hover around the middle, you know. We can learn from their experiences, of course, we always can learn from their experiences. The answer to your question in that sense is yes, but our contexts are also very different, that it isn't so simple as a direct copy and paste of one activity over to another. The good news, I think, is that humanist organizations around the world have got much better at sharing their experience, sharing their knowledge, sharing their resources, often for translation. So we help to train celebrants in 2 or 3 other countries, including Iceland. We've helped to provide education resources to the Norwegians and to the Spanish, and the flow goes both ways. But in terms of tactics, I think that the successful model of a humanist organization that will command public support, that will grow and thrive, is really the one that has been tried and tested in the UK, which is this triple alliance of a sense of community for the members, services provided to the non-religious externally, and a platform for advocacy, you know, for campaigning for social change. And those sort of 3 things together do seem to make, you know, feed off each other to make for a good successful organization. So I think we're on the right track there. Brian Jennings, West Midlands. What does sue the government mean? Yeah, so we normally pursue legal action against the government by judicial review, which is one of the reasons why we're so keen to campaign to preserve the right to judicial review for every citizen. So we'll normally support, so for example, in 2015, we supported Mrs. Fox, who sued her local authority because they weren't including humanism equally on the school curriculum together with religions. We supported Laura and Eunan, a couple in Northern Ireland, to take legal action against the government of Northern Ireland because they weren't allowed a legal humanist marriage. And we supported some parents just last year who were bringing action against their school in the southeast because they weren't providing alternative activities for their children when they were doing Christian prayers in assembly. And so, and all of those, they were all judicial reviews. So applying to a court saying this action of this public authority is unlawful for these different reasons, usually to do with human rights law, which mandates the equal treatment of religious and non-religious people, but also that the state be disinterested and impartial between different confessions, or at least it does at the moment. If the government repeals or varies that law, maybe it won't in the future. And so that's what we're usually doing. Peter and Leslie Bottomley, Shropshire Humanists. Given that Humanists UK has important campaigns that generally unite humanists, why is there not greater vigour in advocating regarding climate change? Well, only yesterday we were advertising on all our social media that we just joined the new Crack the Crisis coalition, which is about climate change COVID-19 vaccines and international aid. We've been members of the Climate Coalition almost since the beginning, and Humanist Climate Action, which is our specific network of members who join together to take action on this, is, I think, relaunching this April, having existed for the last few years as Humanists for a Better World. So we are committed to that. That's as part of our policy to campaign on big issues where we can encourage the use of both empathy, compassion, and reason to meet the big problems of our species in the short and long term. However, we're not an organisation with policy expertise on climate change. So we attempt to give our members the opportunity to organise and give our support institutionally to things like the Climate Coalition that are doing something about it. But it's not uncontroversial. I mean, only today when we had, yesterday, what day is it today? The 1st, the 2nd? It was on the 1st anyway, yesterday. Time has lost meaning. I'm sure it has for all of you. It's just one undifferentiated mass of events. I think the 1st of February was yesterday. And so if it was, then this coalition launch that we were a member of about climate change, we had 2 members resign because they didn't believe that we should be getting involved in climate change. So it's always a bit contentious, whatever we do. But we do we do participate in actions to tackle climate change. And specifically in the case of the present coalition that we've joined to bring the UK government into the position where it might show some moral leadership, especially when it hosts the G7 this year. Martin Bate, we would like more humanists to be invited to participate in civic state events. How can we do that? Very important question. It depends where you're targeting. Obviously, humanists are now represented at the Cenotaph every year, and as a result of that, we do get invited to a number of national state events. Again, like I say, there's a bit like when I was talking about the barriers to our success as an advocacy organisation. There are a lot of institutional barriers to the full mainstream acceptance of humanists in those contexts, and obviously the churches are very significant gatekeepers and advocates of our exclusion very often. But when we try and pursue that at the national level where we can. In terms of locally, the greatest successes that I've known local humanist groups have at, for example, joining remembrance ceremonies, but also at doing things like leading moments of reflection before council meetings or whatever, have come in one of either 2 ways. Firstly, it's because the people in public life that were responsible for inviting people to these events have been humanists. So I advise you all to tell all the humanists you know to become local elected councillors and magistrates and public officials and politicians and get involved in public life so they can set the agenda on these things. Or secondly, because the local humanist group in question has simply asked politely if they could be included and received a yes in reply. Now, of course, that doesn't always work. Sometimes you'd be faced with a big unfriendly no, and at that point our team can help. You can contact our public affairs team and we can give you some of the more legal arguments, the more legal shaped arguments that you can make. Caroline from Birmingham Humanist, how do we follow up on the investment in school speakers? What can we do to reach non-religious people who might identify themselves as humanists? Well, that's my question. Yeah, the investment in school speakers is interesting. I think when because we obviously do train a lot of school speakers, and like I say, we measure the number of pupils that we get in front of in a given year. Because of underreporting, I'd say it's something probably around 70,000 a year. We think that we get in front of as school speakers, but we don't track so much what those school speakers speak about, nor do we measure the sort of success that they've had in communicating humanism per se. So, we survey teachers who've had our school speakers on, was it a good experience? Did you get what you wanted out of it? But we don't particularly gather any insight then into the extent to which young people have learned more about humanism as a result. What can we do to reach non-religious? So I don't know, it's an open question, but all I can say is that we're always thinking about new ways that we can measure those things. What can we do to reach non-religious people who might identify themselves as humanists? Well, one of the things we're doing at the moment is profiling those people. So we get YouGov every year to ask various survey questions for us. This is private research of the sort that, you know, organizations do when they're trying to understand markets and so on. And that's always very interesting research, in that it gives us a sort of profile of people. First of all, the people who have humanist beliefs and values, and second of all, the people who have humanist beliefs and values and are willing to self-identify as use the word humanist. That's how we know that 6% of people are in that last category there. They will identify as humanists. 6% sounds very small, but it's more than there are Muslims or Jews or Sikhs or whatever. So, you know, it's quite a big figure of self-identity. And we begin to build a profile of who those people are by doing that, a demographic profile, I mean. The other thing we can do is we can ask those people who had humanist beliefs and values but didn't identify as humanist, whether they would, you know, we can say things like, these beliefs and values that you've just said, you know, here are some words that some people might use to describe those beliefs. Would you choose any of these words to describe those beliefs? And then find out more about why they would or why they wouldn't choose the word humanist. And so if it's a matter of, I've honed in really in your question here, Karen, about identify themselves as humanists. I'm assuming that's what your question is about. But there are messages that you can test to see how people can best be communicated with on that question, and we do that. And you know, we've got quite a good rate on things like Facebook adverts or Google adverts of being able to connect with people in the demographic groups where we know that there might be humanists, and signing those up. I mean, our database of members and supporters, which was 4,000 people when I first started working at Humanists UK. I'm not trying to imply that I'm responsible for this growth of the database I'm about to say, by the way. I'm just saying that that's when I first learned of it. It was 4,000 people about 15 years ago, and it's now 100,000 people. And that database has grown by targeting of people who we think might be supportive, amenable, and drawing them in through the different communications that we have, you know. So I think that's something that we're always working on and keen to be more successful on. Charles Bailey. Sorry, Charles. Most people hear humanist principles and think, well, that's obvious. That's interesting. Do you think that's true? I don't know about most people. Numbers are crucial. We've never exceeded a low six-figure of members. So how do we persuade people to part with good money to join the Round Earth Society? Very nice. Yes, membership anywhere is low. That's just true. And worse than that, membership is declining. All membership, not all, but the aggregate of membership organisations in the UK is showing membership decline. That doesn't mean that some organisations aren't growing or still having quite high figures, but in general, membership of organisations is something that is in decline. I think probably this is, and I don't see why we should think that we particularly could buck that trend. Now, of course, we'll want as many people to be members as possible, and we want to, increase the feeling of affiliation that members and potential members might have to us, and to want to be part of this endeavour. But I think the more important thing is probably to think of ways other than membership that can offer people the connection that we're looking for. What really grew the database, for example, just thinking in those blunt terms for the moment, from that 5,000 to that 100,000, was when, and we were triggered to think about it by people's economic circumstances. We had a conversation earlier about age and about ethnic identity. Another thing we considered about 6 years ago was class and socioeconomic position, and started thinking about why we skewed very middle class, even very upper middle class, in the profiling that we did of our members back when I was first working at VHA. And one of the things that we did to attempt to broaden ourselves, our membership base, particularly, our base of people in that connection, was to introduce a supporter category where you didn't have to pay. So, most of those people who've joined our database, taking it from 5,000 to 100,000, about a quarter of them are paying members, but the other 3/4 are supporters. Now, some of that, don't get me wrong, some of those supporters actually give over the course of a year in financial terms more than a member does, because they make a lot of donations, or they do, but some of them don't. Some of them some of them are people who don't donate, They sign petitions, do other activism, try to speak in schools, and then they might become members as well in the future. But the broadening of ways of participating beyond just membership is probably the second way in which we need to think about this problem. The number of people identifying as humanist, of course, has gone up, and that's another measure for us. We might not measure our success in, names in our database. We might measure our success about whether or not we can achieve some growth in that 6%, which has gone up from 4% to 6%, which is quite a lot over the last 5 years. And sign up your friends as well, of course. If all of you haven't signed up 5 more people by the end of this year, then count yourselves a laggard. Tony Howe, Birmingham Humanists. There's a lot more questions here than there were groups, I think. Tony Howe from Birmingham Humanists. How can Humanists UK persuade more people, especially young people, that it's important to identify as humanists and associate with other humanists if possible to help avoid allowing other less positive movements to lead the agenda in society? Good question. This is, again, something that we're doing more thinking about. Now, this is something that divides our members, I must say. I hope all of you that are members filled in the recent membership survey that was sent around at the end of last year and then followed up at the beginning of this year. About 4,000 people filled it in, which was really good. It's a good sample, a good sort of chunk, not properly sampled, but it's a good size of number of respondents. And one of the things that sort of divides people, not 50-50, but it is divisive, is this idea of whether or not we should be attempting to persuade people to identify as humanists. So probably around 75% of people who completed the survey are basically happy with that, or we infer from the answers they gave to various questions that they're happy with that. But a good quarter sort of think, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know why. I don't really like to use words or labels or definitions. I sort of join Humanists UK because I want to support this sort of cause, but I don't really want to make a fetish of an identity and overuse a label and so on. And of course, there are good intellectual reasons for that some people might articulate. I don't happen to agree with them myself, but there are good intellectual reasons for it. You might find that definitions are too confining, that they structure your thought in the wrong direction, that they might lead to identity politics or to divisive positioning or whatever. I don't think that's true, but they're reasonable positions that people might hold about identity. So we have to find ways of, I think, first of all, really reaffirming for ourselves that to encourage people to identify is actually what we want to do. Michael Rosen is a good advocate of this, the poet who wrote a good children's book with a co-author about humanism. I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name. I'm going to look that up because she was a co-author of it, and I don't want to deny her.
Anne-Marie Young.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And she's a splendid person and doesn't deserve my brain fade there. So Michael Rosen said, of course we should encourage people to identify, because you can't think about something, you can't understand something, you can't have ideas about something unless you name that thing. And that's why he said it was important to have a book on humanism for children, because school is the great naming time, when you're learning the words for everything, and with the word comes the concept, and you can explore it, you can think about it, you can grow in your understanding of it, you can interact with those ideas and develop them further, and so on and so forth. And I think that identification has that role in someone's well-being and in their sense of self, and so and opening the doors of personal development. So I think we do need to identify as humanists, and I would encourage that. How do we do that? How do we encourage people to do that? That, of course, is the more difficult question. We're doing some work on this at the moment, and we're looking at some of our younger patrons. For example, we've got a couple of Game of Thrones actors and a famous poker player. And they have all volunteered to try and do some videos that we can put on different platforms, saying why they identify as a humanist and why they think it's important that we identify as a humanist. The poker player is quite keen on game theory. They say, you're not going to win the battle of ideas if you haven't even got a word for your ideas. And so that was quite a persuasive argument. Sorry, Mark Taylor, Breakout 13. We didn't get around to nominating because we launched into a discussion. However, we discussed a couple of issues. One was, does someone grow into humanism? I suppose some people do, and some people are just born that way. Although there are humanist groups at universities, etc., do a lot of us reach an age where we begin to reach an understanding of the way the world works? Interesting question. I think the data suggests that actually this isn't something. No, I think the data suggests no. Fundamental beliefs about the world actually don't change very much. I think between the age of, is it 25 and the rest of your life. So there's a moment, I can't remember what it is, but it's somewhere around your 20s, where you sort of, your ideas become fixed, not around the edges. And of course, that's not to say that no one changes their minds. Obviously people do, and people have, and there's been a big shift away from religious ideas, for example, that's occurred in our country, with people changing their minds in adulthood. But a lot of the change in, let's say, for example, a change in identity from religious to non-religious is not age. It's not something that's happened to people in their lives, but it's something generational. And this is quite similar with these ideas. The surveys that I mentioned a little while ago that we do every year, the way that we determine the humanist beliefs and values of a person is we ask them 4 questions, and there are options on those 4 questions. And the questions are things like, well, all the questions say, you know, choose which of these statements comes closest to your own view. And then the statements, so in one question, the statements will be things like, you know, what's right and wrong is fixed and never changes. Or what's right and wrong depends on the circumstances and the blah, blah, blah. Or there's no such thing as right and wrong. I should just do whatever I like. You know, it's obvious which one of the is the humanist answer there. It's not the last one. It's not the first one. It's the second one. And then we see who gives the humanist answer to each of those 4 questions. And we say, right, this 30, whatever it is, 34% of people is who we use as humanist beliefs and values for the purposes of our data. And the interesting thing about that actually is that for each of the 4 humanist questions, over 65% of the population give the humanist answer to at least one of them. It's very unusual these days for someone to be to give the doctrinaire, religious or theistic answer to every one of those questions. You know, you're into sort of 12% territory there. But if you look at the ages of people who give the humanist answer to all those questions, it's overwhelmingly young people. So the evidence, if anything, is against your hypothesis in your question, the premise of your question, because it seems that the younger you are, actually, you have those humanist ideas, rather than, as your question implies, the older you are. Should I keep
Andrew,
going, Sarah? I mean, we're running out
I'm
of
sorry
time,
to interrupt.
questions.
There are a couple more questions. Are you able to
8.
give one sentence? 8. Okay, that's probably
one sentence. Are you saying I'm saying
one sentence answers? Can you do that?
Yes. One word answered. Okay. Sorry, some of them are just very long, and it takes me some time to read them. Hollywood, Shropshire. There's lots of questions here. The census is very significant this year. Yes, it is. We're starting online ads in at the beginning of March, because there's the campaign in real life and billboard doesn't make sense this year because people aren't moving about, so and you can't deliver leaflets. So we're just doing online ads in March. Humanism, is it being added as an official part of the curriculum? Yes, in Wales. Yes, in Scotland. Not yet in Northern Ireland, but hopefully in England, not as a result of political reform, but as a result of litigation. Yes, Michael Rose and Anne-Marie Young's book is best for children. Mark Taylor, Breakout 13. Secondly, is this because there was an early, that was the question I just answered about young people. If everyone reached an understanding that religiosity is a choice, you can be religious if you want to or not if you don't, would there always be a lot of people who continue to believe in superstition, be that religion or some other irrational idea? Most certainly, of course, I'm sure that's true. People are all different. And so certainly there would be people in that situation. John Dowdall, should not Humanist UK adopt an initiative to establish humanist schools in England and Wales? I can't really give a one-sentence answer to that. The case in favour is that education is now so diverse that at least we've been modelling a good inclusive approach to education, and some young people would get an excellent education. The case against is that our vision is for the school system as a whole, for it to be open, inclusive, diverse and objective, And by creating a humanist analog just for religious schools as they currently exist, we would be shooting ourselves in the foot. That's the case for and against. Tony Brewer, is humanism threatened by the increasing? Oh, Tony, I think you pressed return before you finished your question. Holing, how can local groups support Humanist UK to achieve their goals while remaining as independent groups? Good question. Let's think about that in the next 12 months, which we will be doing. James from Ely, will the online form for the forthcoming census give humanism as an option for belief or religion? No, the census question is, what is your religion? Terrible question. And so you must just tick no religion. And don't write in humanist, because that gives us a really small number of humanists that then the Christian Institute has used ever since 2011, saying, oh, there's only 4,000 humanists in England, so why should they have anything? It is not a question about your beliefs. It's a question about whether you're religious or not. So you just tick no. And Sarah says next week's meeting is all about, oh, that's you, Sarah. And Victoria Denning, is there going to be a campaign for filling in the census correctly again this year? Yes, as I said, completely online. And we'll be targeting people through specifically Twitter ads, Google ads, and Facebook ads, because we can't deliver leaflets and do billboards, as I said.
Thank you, Andrew. Well done on the one sentence answering. That's a bit of a rush through. There were a lot of questions.
Very
There's
good
a lot
questions.
of silent clapping going on.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Thank you very much for joining us and speaking and for answering all of those questions. It's lovely to see you. For everybody else, we hope to see you again next week. So next week's session is all about climate change. So we've got the lovely Simon Nightingale from Shropshire talking to us. He did send me some notes and I've just closed it, so I shall have to do that from memory. So he's Simon's background is in medicine and neuroscience, so he's going to talk a little bit about the psychology of climate denial, or why people struggle with the concept of climate change. And then we've got Richard Norman, the philosopher, joining us, which is a lovely treat for us, who's going to talk about the ethics of climate change. And Simon will tell us a little bit more about the new Humanist climate change campaign that Andrew mentioned earlier. So I think that's it from us. Thank you very much for joining us. Please do come again next week. Enjoy the rest of your evening.